Before we journey back to the ancient world of marble temples and olive groves, please hit that like button and follow our channel for more heartwarming stories. If this tale of courage in classical Greece doesn't touch your soul, you can always remove your like. But I believe this story of honor and redemption will resonate with you long after our tale is told. Don't forget to subscribe to join our community and never miss our latest stories of hope, triumphing over cruelty. Chapter 1. The House of Tears. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble columns of Athens as Lysander made his way through the agora, his weathered sandals clicking against the worn stones. His simple chiton, though clean, bore the patches and careful mending that marked him as a man who had known better days. Once, Lysander had been among the most prosperous merchants in the city, his ships carrying precious goods across the wine-dark sea. But the gods had turned their faces from him 3 years past, when pirates had taken his largest vessel and creditors had claimed the rest. Now he survived by buying small quantities of goods from arriving ships and selling them in the marketplace, earning barely enough to maintain his modest dwelling and put food on his table. Today, like so many others, he hoped to find some opportunity that might lift him from his circumstances. As he passed through the residential district where the wealthy citizens kept their grand houses, Lysander heard a sound that made him pause. It was the crack of a whip, followed by a cry of pain that was unmistakably feminine and young. The sound came from behind the high walls of Marcus Quintus's villa, a Roman merchant who had made Athens his home and brought with him the harsh customs of his homeland. Lysander knew he should continue walking. The affairs of the wealthy were not his concern, and Marcus Quintus was known to be a man who did not welcome interference in his household matters. But something about that cry, so filled with pain and desperation, rooted him to the spot. "Please," came a voice from beyond the wall, speaking in accented Greek. "I have done nothing wrong. The amphora was already cracked when I picked it up." "Silence, girl!" roared a man's voice that Lysander recognized as belonging to Quintus himself. "You will learn to be more careful with my possessions, or you will learn to endure the consequences." Again came the sound of the whip, and another cry of anguish. Lysander found himself moving toward the villa's entrance before he'd consciously decided to do so. The heavy wooden door was guarded by a massive Thracian slave whose scarred arms spoke of experience in gladiatorial combat. "I wish to see your master," Lysander announced, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I have a business proposition that may interest him." The guard looked him up and down with obvious disdain. "Master Quintus does not conduct business with beggars." "I am no beggar," Lysander replied with as much dignity as he could muster. "I am a merchant of this city, and I have dealt with Romans before. Tell your master that Lysander seeks an audience regarding a matter of mutual benefit." The guard hesitated, then gestured for Lysander to wait while he disappeared into the house. From within, the sounds of punishment had ceased, but Lysander could hear muffled sobbing that tugged at his heart. When the guard returned, he led Lysander through a courtyard adorned with stolen Greek statues and into a receiving chamber where Marcus Quintus sat on an ornate chair, a goblet of wine in his hand. He was a heavy-set man with cruel eyes and soft hands that had never known honest labor. At his feet, kneeling on the marble floor, was a young woman with long dark hair that partially concealed her face. Lysander's breath caught in his throat. The girl could not have been more than 18, with the delicate features common to the islands of the Aegean. Her chiton was torn and stained, and he could see fresh welts across her shoulders where the whip had found its mark. But it was her eyes that captured his attention when she briefly looked up, dark eyes filled with intelligence, pain, and a spirit that had not yet been broken, despite whatever cruelties she had endured. "So," Quintus said, his Latin-accented Greek grating on Lysander's ears, "what brings the great Lysander to my humble home? I heard your ships now rest at the bottom of the sea. Lysander forced himself to ignore the insult and the girl's suffering for the moment. I have heard that you sometimes acquire exotic goods for wealthy clients in Rome. I have recently come into possession of some rare Phoenician glass that might interest such buyers. It was a lie, but Lysander had learned long ago that sometimes deception in service of a greater good was no sin. Quintus leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued by the mention of valuable goods. Phoenician glass, you say? What type, and in what condition? Vessels of exceptional quality, with the deep blue coloring that commands such high prices in Roman markets, Lysander continued, watching Quintus's face carefully. However, I find myself in need of immediate payment rather than the delayed profits of overseas trade. Interesting, Quintus mused, taking another drink of wine. And what would you want for these pieces? Here was where Lysander took his greatest gamble. His eyes flicked to the girl, still kneeling silently at Quintus's feet, then back to the Roman's face. I would consider a trade rather than payment in silver. I have need of a household servant, someone who can read and write to help with my business correspondence. Quintus's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You want to trade valuable glassware for a slave girl? Not just any slave, Lysander said carefully. Someone educated, someone who can be trusted with confidential business matters. I have heard that you possess a girl with such skills. The young woman's head snapped up at his words, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. Quintus noticed the exchange and smiled unpleasantly. Ah, you mean Lydia here? Yes, she can read and write in both Greek and Latin, and she has some knowledge of mathematics as well. Unfortunately, she is also clumsy and willful, as you just witnessed. She broke a valuable amphora this morning through carelessness. Lysander forced himself to nod sympathetically while inwardly seething at the obvious lie. He had heard the girl say the vessel was already cracked, and he could see in her eyes that she spoke the truth. Perhaps a change of environment would improve her disposition, Lysander suggested. Away from familiar surroundings, she might prove more tractable. Quintus considered this, his gaze moving between Lysander and the girl. You would pay how much in glassware for this troublesome creature? 3 pieces, Lysander said, though he had no idea how he would obtain even one. Fine work, suitable for a senator's table. Show me the pieces first, Quintus demanded. Then we will discuss terms. Lysander's heart sank. He had hoped to conclude the bargain immediately, but Quintus was too experienced a trader to commit without seeing the goods. Very well, but as a sign of good faith, perhaps you would allow me to examine the girl more closely. I would hate to discover after our trade that she is unsuitable for my needs. Quintus waved his hand dismissively. Examine her all you like. Lydia, stand up. Show the merchant what he might be purchasing. The girl rose gracefully despite her obvious pain, and Lysander was struck by her dignity even in these degrading circumstances. She stood with her chin raised, meeting his gaze directly, and he saw something in her expression that told him she understood exactly what he was attempting. You read and write in both languages? Lysander asked, moving closer under the pretense of inspection. Yes, Kyrios, she replied softly, using the Greek term of respect. I also know some mathematics and can keep household accounts. And your family? How did you come to be here? Pain flashed across her features. Pirates took our ship 2 years ago. They killed my father and sold my mother and me separately. Master Quintus purchased me in the slave markets of Delos. Lysander's fists clenched involuntarily. Pirates again, destroying innocent lives, just as they had destroyed his own livelihood. But this was worse, far worse, than the mere loss of property. She will serve adequately for your needs, Quintus interrupted, clearly bored with the conversation. Now when can I see this Phoenician glass you claim to possess? Tomorrow morning, Lysander said, though he had no idea how he would make good on his promise. "I will bring the pieces here for your inspection." "See that you do," Quintus replied, "and if they prove to be of inferior quality, do not waste my time with further visits." As Lysander turned to leave, he risked one more glance at Lydia. She was watching him with an expression of desperate hope, mixed with fear, as if she dared to believe he might truly be her salvation, but was terrified of disappointment. In that moment, he silently vowed to the gods that he would find a way to honor his promise, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had left. "Until tomorrow, then," he said to Quintus, then bowed slightly to Lydia. "Farewell, young lady." He left the villa with his mind racing. Somewhere in Athens, he had to find 3 pieces of Phoenician glass valuable enough to purchase a human life. He had perhaps 10 silver drachmas to his name, barely enough to buy food for a week, let alone rare glassware worth a young woman's freedom. But as he walked back through the agora, Lysander remembered the words of his grandfather, who had taught him the merchant's trade. "Sometimes the greatest profits come not from what we sell, but from what we save." Today, he would discover just how far a man might go to save an innocent soul from cruelty. That night, as he sat in his simple dwelling with a cup of watered wine and a piece of barley bread, Lysander found himself thinking not just about how to acquire the promised glass, but about the girl herself. There had been something in her eyes, an intelligence and strength that reminded him of Athena's sacred flame. She was no ordinary slave, but a person of worth who had been reduced to property by the cruel whims of fate and evil men. Tomorrow would bring challenges that would test everything he believed about honor, justice, and the favor of the gods. But tonight, for the first time in years, Lysander felt a purpose greater than mere survival. He was going to save Lydia, and in doing so, perhaps save something of his own soul as well. Chapter 2. The Merchant's Gamble. Lysander rose before dawn, his mind sharp despite having slept little. Throughout the long night he had considered and discarded dozens of plans for acquiring the Phoenician glass he'd promised Quintus. His few remaining contacts in the merchant community would never extend him credit for such valuable items, and he lacked the coin to purchase them outright. As the first light of Helios painted the eastern sky, inspiration struck. Lysander dressed quickly and made his way through the quiet streets to the workshop of Cleomenes, an old friend who crafted pottery and glassware of exceptional quality. If anyone in Athens could help him, it would be the master artisan who had once supplied vessels for Lysander's overseas trade. The workshop was already alive with activity when Lysander arrived. Cleomenes, a thin man with powerful hands, stained by years of working with clay and fire, looked up from the pottery wheel where he was shaping an amphora. "Lysander," Cleomenes called out warmly, "what brings you to my humble shop at such an early hour? Surely not business, given the state of your fortunes." Despite his desperate circumstances, Lysander smiled at his friend's gentle teasing. "Actually, Cleomenes, I do come on business. I need your help with a matter of great importance." The potter's expression grew more serious as he sensed something in Lysander's tone. "Tell me what troubles you, old friend." Lysander explained his encounter with Quintus and Lydia, carefully omitting no detail of the girl's suffering or his rash promise. When he finished, Cleomenes sat quietly for several moments, his hands still working the clay as he considered. "So you need 3 pieces of Phoenician glass that you cannot afford to save a girl you barely know, from a man who could destroy what remains of your reputation if you fail to deliver," Cleomenes summarized. "Have I understood correctly?" "Yes," Lysander admitted. "I know how it sounds." "It sounds like something the heroes in Homer's tales might attempt," Cleomenes replied with a slight smile. "Fortunately for you, I have been experimenting with a new technique that produces glass very similar to Phoenician work. The color is not quite the same deep blue, but in certain light it would fool most buyers. Lysander's heart leapt with hope. You would help me create false pieces? Not false, Cleomenes corrected. Original work that resembles Phoenician craftsmanship. There is no deception in selling quality glassware, only in how one describes its origin. He paused in his work and looked directly at Lysander. But this will not be free, my friend. I have my own family to feed. Of course, Lysander said quickly. What would you require? Cleomenes stood and walked to a shelf lined with finished pieces. I have been commissioned to create a set of drinking vessels for the Temple of Dionysus. The work is complex and will take many days. If you would assist me with this project, providing skilled hands and artistic judgment, I will create 3 glass pieces worthy of a Roman senator's table. It was more than fair, and Lysander grasped his friend's arm gratefully. When do we begin? Now, Cleomenes replied. If we work through the day and night, I can have the glass pieces ready by tomorrow morning. But you must understand, if this Quintus discovers the true origin of the glassware, then I will face whatever consequences come, Lysander finished. A man's honor is worth more than his comfort. They worked through the day with barely a pause for food or water. Cleomenes proved to be not only a master craftsman, but also a teacher with infinite patience, as he guided Lysander through the delicate process of shaping molten glass. The work was hot, demanding, and occasionally dangerous, but Lysander found himself losing track of time as he focused on creating something beautiful. As the sun began to set, 3 exquisite vessels sat cooling on the workshop table. Each was a masterpiece of deep blue glass, with delicate white patterns swirled through the material. They were not Phoenician, but they were magnificent. Your Roman will be pleased, Cleomenes said, wiping sweat from his brow. Now go home and rest. Tomorrow you face your trial. But rest did not come easily to Lysander that night. He found himself thinking not just about the exchange he hoped to make, but about what would happen afterward. Even if he succeeded in freeing Lydia from Quintus, what then? He could barely support himself, let alone take responsibility for another person's welfare. These doubts plagued him through the dark hours, but as dawn approached, his resolve strengthened. He had made a promise, both to the girl and to himself. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would meet them as his ancestors had met theirs, with courage and honor. The morning sun was climbing toward its zenith when Lysander arrived at Quintus's villa, carrying the 3 glass vessels carefully wrapped in soft cloth. The same Thracian guard admitted him, leading him once again to the receiving chamber where Quintus waited. This time, Lydia was not present, and Lysander felt a stab of worry. What if Quintus had decided to sell her to someone else? Or worse, what if his cruel punishments had gone too far? So, merchant, Quintus said without preamble, show me what you claim is worth one of my household slaves. Lysander carefully unwrapped the first vessel, placing it on the table, where the morning light streaming through the window would show it to best advantage. Quintus's eyes widened slightly as he saw the deep blue glass with its swirling patterns of white. Impressive, the Roman admitted, reaching out to examine the piece more closely. The color is excellent, and the workmanship appears sound. Lysander revealed the second and third pieces, each slightly different in size and decoration, but equally beautiful. Quintus examined all 3 with the practiced eye of an experienced trader, holding them up to the light and running his fingers over their smooth surfaces. These are indeed fine pieces, Quintus said finally. They would fetch good prices in Roman markets. Very well. We have an agreement. Excellent, Lysander said, relief flooding through him. When may I collect the girl? Immediately, if you wish, Quintus replied with a shrug. She is no great loss to my household. Guard! He bellowed. The Thracian appeared promptly, and Quintus waved his hand dismissively. "Fetch the girl Lydia. Tell her to gather her possessions and prepare to leave with this gentleman." As they waited, Quintus poured himself wine and continued examining the glassware. "Tell me, Lysander, what do you really intend to do with the girl? You spoke of needing a clerk, but I suspect there is more to this transaction." Lysander met the Roman's calculating gaze steadily. "I intend to treat her with the respect due to any person of intelligence and skill, nothing more, nothing less." "How remarkably Greek of you," Quintus said with a laugh that held no warmth. "In Rome, we understand that some people are born to rule and others to serve. It makes life much simpler." Before Lysander could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Lydia appeared in the doorway. She had clearly been given time to wash and change her clothes, and now wore a simple but clean chiton. Her few possessions were wrapped in a small bundle that she carried carefully in her arms. She looked first at Quintus, bowing her head respectfully, then at Lysander. In her eyes he saw gratitude mixed with uncertainty about what her new life might hold. "Lydia," Quintus said formally, "you now belong to Lysander of Athens. Serve him as faithfully as you have served me, and perhaps he will be less demanding of perfection." "Thank you, Kyrios," Lydia said quietly to Lysander. "I will strive to prove worthy of your trust." "The transaction is complete, then," Quintus declared, already turning his attention back to his new glassware. "Guard, see them out." As they walked through the villa's courtyard toward the exit, Lysander was acutely aware of Lydia walking silently beside him. He could feel her tension, her uncertainty about what freedom with him might mean compared to slavery with Quintus. It was only when they had passed through the villa's gates and were walking along the street that either of them spoke. "Kyrios," Lydia said hesitantly, "may I ask what duties you will expect of me?" Lysander stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Passers-by moved around them, but he paid them no attention. This conversation was too important to have while walking. "First," he said gently, "you will not call me Kyrios. My name is Lysander, and that is what you will use. Second, you are not my slave. Though Quintus may believe otherwise, you are a free person who will work with me as my assistant, if you choose to do so." Lydia stared at him in shocked silence for several heartbeats. "I don't understand," she said finally. "You paid for me with valuable goods. How can you say I am free?" "Because freedom is not something that can be truly bought or sold," Lysander replied. "It can only be given or taken. I am giving you yours." Tears began to flow down Lydia's cheeks, and she seemed to struggle with conflicting emotions. "But where will I go? I have no family, no home, no means of supporting myself. Without a master, I have nothing." "You have intelligence, education, and skills," Lysander pointed out. "Those are worth more than gold in the right circumstances. And if you choose to stay and work with me, you will have a place to live and honest work to do. You would trust me with your business affairs, knowing nothing about me except what little Quintus told you?" Lysander smiled. "I know more than you think. I know you have courage because you endured Quintus's cruelty without breaking. I know you have integrity because you told the truth about the amphora, even knowing you would be punished for it. And I know you have strength because you are still standing here asking sensible questions instead of collapsing with relief." Lydia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and when she looked at him again, there was something new in her expression, not just gratitude, but genuine respect. "Then yes, Lysander," she said, using his name for the first time, "I choose to stay and work with you, but I have one condition." "Name it." "Teach me everything you know about the merchant's trade. I want to become more than just a clerk. I want to build something meaningful with whatever time the gods grant me." Lysander felt something stir in his chest, a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced since before the pirates destroyed his ships. Here was someone who understood that true wealth lay not in possessions, but in purpose. "Agreed," he said, extending his hand to her in the manner of equals making a pact. "Partners, then." Lydia took his hand without hesitation. Partners. As they walked toward Lysander's modest dwelling, both were quiet, lost in thoughts of the future they might build together. Neither knew that this handshake would be the foundation of something far greater than either could imagine. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales from the ancient world. Tomorrow brings new challenges as Lysander and Lydia begin their partnership. Chapter 3. Forged in Wisdom. 3 months had passed since Lydia had walked away from Marcus Quintus's villa as a free woman, and the modest dwelling that Lysander called home had been transformed. What had once been the sparse quarters of a struggling merchant now bustled with the organized activity of a growing business. Scrolls containing correspondence with traders from across the Mediterranean lined the walls, and carefully maintained ledgers tracked deals that were slowly but steadily restoring Lysander's fortunes. Lydia had proven herself far more valuable than even Lysander had dared hope. Her quick mind grasped complex trading relationships with ease, and her knowledge of both Greek and Latin opened doors that had been closed to Lysander since his financial troubles began. More than that, she brought fresh perspectives to problems that had seemed insurmountable, finding creative solutions that combined traditional Greek business practices with new ideas she'd observed during her years of slavery. This particular morning found them reviewing correspondence from a potential client in Alexandria when a commotion in the street outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see a crowd gathering around 2 men who appeared to be in heated argument. "Trouble," Lydia said, recognizing one of the figures. "That's Marcus Quintus, and he looks angry about something." Lysander rose and moved to the window for a better view. The other man was Cleomenes, and even from a distance, Lysander could see that his friend was in distress. Without hesitation, he headed for the door. "Wait!" Lydia said, catching his arm. "If Quintus sees you, he might begin asking questions about our arrangement that you'd prefer not to answer." She was right, of course. Their deception regarding her status as a freed person rather than a purchased slave could create serious legal problems if discovered. But Lysander couldn't stand by while his friend faced trouble alone. "Then we'll have to be clever about it," he said. "Come with me, but stay back and listen. Your ears are sharper than mine for detecting lies." They made their way through the growing crowd, arriving just in time to hear Quintus's raised voice echoing off the surrounding buildings. "This is theft, pure and simple," the Roman was declaring. "You sold me inferior goods under false pretenses, and I demand recompense." Cleomenes stood with his shoulders squared, but his face pale. The glassware was exactly as represented. Quality craftsmanship, suitable for any discriminating buyer. "Suitable?" Quintus laughed harshly. "I sent one of the pieces to Rome as a gift for Senator Gaius Lutius. Do you know what his reply was? He thanked me for the charming local work and asked if I'd taken up supporting struggling provincial artisans." Lysander felt his stomach drop. The senator had recognized that the glass was not genuinely Phoenician, and now Quintus knew he'd been deceived. "The piece served its purpose," Cleomenes replied with dignity. "It was beautiful, functional, and well-made. What more should a buyer expect?" "The buyer should expect what he was promised," Quintus shouted. "You claimed these were genuine Phoenician pieces, not clever imitations." "I made no such claim," Cleomenes said firmly. "I told Lysander that the pieces were quality work, comparable to Phoenician craftsmanship. If he chose to describe them differently to you, that is between you and him." Quintus's eyes narrowed dangerously. So this was Lysander's deception. "Where is he? I'll see him dragged before the Archons for fraud. Lysander knew he could remain hidden no longer. He stepped forward through the crowd, his heart pounding, but his expression calm. "I am here, Quintus," he said clearly. "If you have accusations to make them to my face." The crowd murmured with excitement at this development. Disputes between merchants were always entertaining, especially when they involved foreigners like Quintus. "You!" Quintus pointed an accusatory finger at Lysander. "You deliberately deceived me about the origin of those glass pieces. You claimed they were Phoenician when you knew they were local work." Lysander considered his words carefully. In the crowd, he could see several familiar faces, including other merchants who would spread word of this confrontation throughout the agora within hours. "I told you I had rare glassware that would interest Roman buyers," Lysander replied. "The pieces were indeed rare, being among the finest examples of their type. They were also certainly of interest to Roman buyers, as your senator's letter confirms. Where exactly is the deception?" "You implied they were Phoenician," Quintus sputtered. "You assumed they were Phoenician." Lysander corrected. "I described them as blue glass of exceptional quality. You were so eager to possess them that you never asked me to specify their origin." A few people in the crowd chuckled at this, and Quintus's face reddened further. "Semantic games. You knew what I believed and did nothing to correct my misunderstanding. And you examined the pieces thoroughly before accepting them," Lysander pointed out. "You pronounced them excellent and suitable for Roman markets. Has anything about their quality changed since you made that judgment?" This was dangerous ground, but Lysander pressed his advantage. In Greek society, a man who complained about a bargain he'd willingly accepted risked being seen as lacking in judgment or honor. "The quality is not the issue," Quintus insisted, though several people in the crowd were now murmuring among themselves, and their tone suggested they were not entirely sympathetic to the Romans' position. "Then what is the issue?" asked a voice from the crowd. Lysander was surprised to see that it belonged to Dionysios, one of Athens's most respected merchants. "If the glass was well made and served your purposes, why do you complain?" "Because I was deceived about its value," Quintus replied. "Were you?" Dionysios stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Tell me, what did you pay for these pieces?" "A slave girl," Quintus answered reluctantly. "Ah," Dionysios nodded knowingly. "And what was this slave girl worth to you? How much had you invested in her purchase and training?" Quintus clearly didn't want to answer, but the crowd was watching expectantly. "Perhaps 50 drachmas, over the course of 2 years. 50 drachmas, Dionysius repeated. "And for that investment, you received glass pieces that you yourself described as excellent, suitable for gifting to a Roman senator. Even if they were local work rather than Phoenician, would such pieces not easily be worth 50 drachmas? Murmurs from the crowd suggested they found this reasoning sound. Quintus looked around desperately, realizing that the tide of opinion was turning against him. "You don't understand," he said. "This is about principle, not mere money." "Indeed, it is about principle," agreed a new voice. Everyone turned to see Lydia stepping forward from where she'd been quietly observing. "The principle that a man should honor his bargains and not seek to unmake them when he discovers they were better than he deserved." Quintus stared at her in shock. "You? What are you doing here? And why are you speaking as if you have the right to an opinion?" "Because I am a free citizen of Athens," Lydia replied calmly, though Lysander could see her hands trembling slightly, "and because I have something relevant to say about this matter." "Free citizen?" Quintus laughed harshly. "You are a slave I sold to this man 3 months ago." "You sold my labor contract to Lysander," Lydia corrected. "He chose to cancel that contract and grant me freedom. I now work with him as a partner, not as property." The crowd buzzed with interest at this revelation. Such acts of generosity were rare, and they reflected well on Lysander's character. "Impossible," Quintus declared. "No merchant gives away valuable property for nothing." "Nothing." Lydia's voice carried clearly across the square. "Lysander gained something far more valuable than a slave. He gained a partner who chooses to work with him, who brings her full talents to their shared endeavors, and who has helped increase his profits threefold in just 3 months." This last claim drew surprised murmurs from the merchants in the crowd. Threefold increases in profit were exceptional in any business. "Is this true?" Dionysios asked Lysander. Lysander nodded. "Lydia's insights and skills have indeed proven more valuable than I ever imagined possible. Freedom, it seems, releases capabilities that slavery suppresses." "Remarkable," Dionysios said. "And this partnership has been profitable enough to justify the original investment in those glass pieces." "Many times over," Lysander confirmed. Quintus looked around the circle of faces and saw that he had lost the crowd entirely. His attempt to reclaim value from a transaction he now regretted had instead become a public demonstration of the wisdom and generosity that marked a true Greek merchant. "This is not over," he said finally, his voice tight with anger. "I will not be made a fool of by provincial Greeks." "No one has made a fool of you," Dionysios observed mildly. "That appears to be something you have accomplished entirely on your own." Laughter rippled through the crowd at this, and Quintus's face went from red to purple. Without another word, he pushed through the gathered people and stalked away, his dignity in tatters. As the crowd began to disperse, Dionysios approached Lysander and Lydia. "A word with you both, if I may." They followed him to a quiet corner of the agora, away from curious ears. "That was well handled," Dionysios said, "both the original transaction and today's confrontation. But I confess myself curious about something. Young lady, you spoke with remarkable confidence for someone so recently freed. Where did you learn such eloquence?" Lydia glanced at Lysander, who nodded encouragingly. "My father was a rhetor on Samos before the pirates took our ship. He taught me to think clearly and speak persuasively. Quintus never bothered to discover what skills I possessed beyond basic literacy." "His loss, clearly," Dionysios replied. "And Lysander, this partnership you formed, it seems to be working remarkably well. Have you considered expanding your operations?" "What do you mean?" Lysander asked. "I represent a consortium of merchants who trade throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. We're always looking for reliable partners with fresh ideas and strong reputations. Your handling of today's situation, combined with what I've heard about your recent successes, suggests you might be exactly what we need." Lysander felt his pulse quicken. The consortium Dionysios represented was composed of the most successful traders in the Aegean. Association with them could restore his fortunes completely and provide opportunities beyond his current dreams. "We would be honored to discuss such a possibility," he said carefully. "Excellent. There will be a gathering tomorrow evening at my house. Bring your partner," Dionysios said with a nod toward Lydia. "If she's as skilled as today's performance suggests, she'll fit right in with our group." After Dionysios departed, Lysander and Lydia walked slowly back toward their dwelling, both lost in thought. "Do you think it's real?" Lydia asked finally. "This opportunity?" "I think," Lysander replied, "that we've just been offered the chance to build something greater than either of us could have imagined alone. The question is, are we ready for such success?" Lydia smiled, and in her expression Lysander saw the same determined spirit that had survived Quintus's cruelty and embraced the uncertain freedom he'd offered. "I think," she said, "that we've been ready all along. We just needed each other to make it possible." That evening, as they sat reviewing the day's events and planning for tomorrow's meeting, Lysander reflected on the strange paths that led to unexpected destinations. 3 months ago, he had been a failed merchant with nothing left to lose. Today, he was half of a thriving partnership with prospects that seemed limitless. But more than that, he had found something he hadn't even known he was seeking. Someone who believed in the same values he did, who brought out the best in his character, and who faced challenges with courage and wisdom. "Lydia," he said as she finished updating their account ledgers for the day. "Yes, thank you for staying, for trusting me, for becoming the partner I never knew I needed." She looked up from her work, and in her dark eyes he saw affection, respect, and something deeper that made his heart race. "Thank you," she replied softly, "for seeing me as a person worth saving, and then giving me the chance to prove that your faith was justified." Outside their window, the lights of Athens twinkled in the gathering dusk, and somewhere in the distance, a merchant ship's horn announced another arrival in Piraeus. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight, Lysander and Lydia sat in comfortable companionship, planning a future that promised to be everything their past struggles had prepared them to achieve. The gods, it seemed, sometimes rewarded those who chose honor over profit and courage over comfort, and sometimes the greatest treasures came not from distant lands, but from the simple act of recognizing the worth of another human soul. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell for more emotionally powerful stories from the ancient world of Greece and Rome. Will Lysander and Lydia's partnership lead them to the success they dream of? What new adventures await them in the dangerous but rewarding world of Mediterranean trade? Join us for more tales where honor and compassion create lasting bonds that change everything.